Good evening, everyone. Oh, come on. Good evening. It's great to be here. My name is Antonio Villaraigosa. I'm the former Speaker of the California State Assembly and Mayor of Los Angeles for 8 years, and a proud member of the Zocalo Board, which is affiliated with Arizona State University, an organization that I also advise. And I couldn't be more honored to participate. And I think now more than ever, this global forum is needed. And it's needed because across the world, we're seeing people get elected to the presidency, but don't believe in democracy, tried to, start to turn into dictators. And this panel is going to help us think through that issue. I'm honored to introduce the president, or executive director, she's our president, of the Zocalo Board, Moira Shori.
Buenas tardes. Namaste. Thank you for joining us here at the historic Casa de la Primera Imprenta de las Americas. I'm Moira Shori, Executive Director of Zocalo Public Square and Arizona State University Media Enterprise. Zocalo Public Square was founded in Los Angeles in 2003, inspired by the historic place in whose shadow we are sitting. Our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free, and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org, on podcast platforms, and YouTube. So please subscribe for our latest programs. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome you to a program asking, are elected presidents bad for democracy? We are honored to partner with Democracy International to present this conversation as part of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. In 1998, I made my journey from the world's largest democracy, India, to another complicated democracy, the United States. And now I have the honor of standing here before you in one of the world's fastest growing and most dynamic democracies, Mexico. Guiding our conversation about what else, democracy, is our moderator, Joe Matthews. Joe is the Joe is the democracy editor and syndicated California columnist at Zocalo Public Square, and the co-president of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. His weekly column appears in over 30 newspapers across California. Joe was formerly a reporter at the Los Angeles Times, at the Wall Street Journal, and the Baltimore Sun. He was also a senior fellow at New America. He is the co-author of California Crack Up, How Reform Broke the Golden State and How We Can Fix It. And the other book he wrote was The People's Machine, Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Rise of Blockbuster Democracy. He is the original drafter of the Magna Carta, commissioned by the City of Rome on local democracy, to which cities around the world are signatories. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, thank you so much to Moira and to my mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, for those introductions. We have 4 panelists here, and they're so good, they represent 5 continents between the 4 of them. How about that? I'm welcome. Thank you for joining us. And so I want to introduce each of them. I'm going to start with Daniela Vanchik, the European Program Manager at Democracy International since 2017. She leads Democracy International's cornerstone projects and activities that promote participatory and direct democracy at the EU level. She's an expert on the European Citizens Initiative, which is a transnational initiative process. For those who aren't familiar with it, she co-edited a terrific book recently on approaches to active citizenship called Complementary Democracy, The Art of Deliberative Listening. She's She's from the Detroit area, Michigan State graduate, and got a master's from the Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations, and she lives in Cologne, Germany. Next to me is Asrar Benjoura. As a feminist activist, she and I are the only presidents on the stage. I was not elected. I was not appointed. Bruno Kaufman, the other co-founder, started calling me president. I've been trying to quit for 15 years. But he won't let me. She is the president. Is that an elected position? Oh, yeah, an elected position. Okay, an elected president of the Intersection Association for Rights and Freedoms in Tunis, Tunisia, and co-coordinator of the Sexual and Reproductive Rights Commission of the Tunisian Association of Democratic Women. She's organized actors and managed advocacy campaigns in partnership with Friedrich Ebert, the Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation. She now works as coordinator of the Human Rights Education Program of the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. Stepping one step closer is a fellow journalist, Tess Bakaya, editor-in-chief, what? Bakaya, I did it. Did I do it right? Okay. Tess. Of Asia Democracy Chronicles, which is the media arm of Asia Democracy Network, a regional association of civil society organizations seeking to advance the democratization of governance in Asia. She's a journalism lecturer at De La Salle University in Manila, and she served in a series of leadership roles in the press in both the Philippines and throughout Southeast Asia. She's got investigative chops and has done stories about migration, corruption, women, and children for the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. And then finally here is David Altman, who's a professor of political science at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, though he's Uruguayan. He received his PhD from Notre Dame in 2001. His dissertation was The Politics of Coalition Formation and Survival Under Multi-Party Presidential Regimes, which will be useful. He's the author of the two best books on direct democracy around the world. Direct Democracy Worldwide was, and then it's Citizenship and Contemporary Direct Democracy. And he's project manager for the Varieties of Democracy Research Collaborative, which is based at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. I'm going to start with Asrar, my fellow president. But first I want to, before that, I want to just set a little bit of history. Like a lot of dangerous ideas, the idea of having presidents comes from the British. It has a history in academia. There were presidents of Oxford and Cambridge before there were any presidents of a country anywhere in the world. The first president, according to most accounts, in 1755 in Corsica, a man named Filippo Antonio Pasquale de Paoli was elected. They called him a president after he had won the war for independence from Genoa. It did not go that well. George Washington, often labeled the first president of the world, was really second. He was following Paoli. It did not go that well. France invaded. He kind of had to go into exile, worked with the British, worked with Napoleon. His father was Napoleon's secretary. And he ended sort of in a very bad way, dying in exile in London in 1802. So presidency is a tough gig from the beginning. Right now, I want to jump from that to the present of Tunisia, a very, very tough and difficult president. We were here at the Global Forum in Tunis in 2015. We had where the Arab Spring began, the transition from to constitutional democracy. I read the 2014 Constitution, but now we have in these recent years a president, Syed, who recently declared he's ruling by decree. He's ignoring the Constitution. He changed it. I mean, curious. I mean, you're there in a country that is seeing its president make himself a dictator every day, and there's step. My question to you is, what is that like? And given all the Tunisian democracy forces won the Nobel Prize 7 years ago, right? What's gone wrong? Is it the person in the job, or was it something about the job itself, the presidency that was created in this constitution that has made it go wrong?
In Tunisia, when the people suffer from an economic and social crisis, when the rate of citizen participation in election declined, candidates who oppose treat to democracy can win through mechanism of democracy. Likewise, when public opinion is directed through media and social media, which has happened in Tunisia, for example, with the current president, according to what he is currently doing and what he has done in recent years. It's an anti-democratic. He is a president who won the election through a mechanism of democracy, but he is anti-democratic. He has eliminated all powers in his hand, violated and disregarded the fundamental principle of democracy. In conservative context, populists and fascists can take advantage of democracy to mobilize citizens against progressive and democratic opponent and win election. This is what happened in Tunisia. When the current president took advantage of some issue under discussion, such as equality, the death penalty, and the discriminalization of homosexuality, to mobilize citizens in this favor on the ground that will protect the value of society and religion. It's important to note that democratic problems can also arise from other factors, such as weak institutions, corruption, inequality, and external interference. So that's why what happened in Tunisia.
Do you have any regrets that, do Tunisians express regrets that maybe we shouldn't have had a president when we created this constitution? They did.
We are in the process of democratic transition, and we don't win.
It's very tough. I mean, the news is every day more opponents thrown in prison.
And the weak institution, the corruption.
So sorry to hear. So sorry to hear. We're going to move next to Daniela Vanchik, both European and American, covering two continents for us. Europe doesn't have a lot of presidents compared to some other parts of the world. I mean, they do have the French president, the current French president. It's a job. It's a very centralized system. There are debates about its power, but the current French president was fond in his first term of comparing himself to Jupiter in the sense of his size and power. He's now switched to Hephaestus, the god of fire, the forge, and volcanoes. But when you go beyond the country, there is a lively debate in Europe right now about presidencies and whether they should be elected, and you're part of it. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Europe's interesting because we, of course, have the European Union, so we don't have a president of this, but we have a European Commission president, and we tried to do this a little bit more democratically, how to elect this this person, which is now Ursula von der Leyen, and this was through a Spitzenkandidat process. This is a leading...
Can you say that word again?
Spitzenkandidat.
Spitzenkandidat.
Yes, which is what not just the Germans say, it's really used across Europe, but it's the leading candidate system, basically. So when European citizens were going to vote for the European Parliament elections, the European political parties were putting forward their leading candidate for the European Commission president. So if that party would have won, this is who should have become the Commission president. Well, that's not how Ursula von der Leyen got her position. So the Spitzenkandidat process didn't work. In the end, it was the Council, which is the member states, so the member state governments, the 27 EU countries, who said they will not take the candidate who really it should have been. And that's how we got Ursula von der Leyen, who is somebody that most Europeans don't know. Maybe even in Germany was not such a well-known name. She was a German Minister of Defense. So this is a case where this failed, where we tried to make it's not the president, right? But I guess you can say the leading person of the European Union tried to bring that system a little bit closer to the people, make that also a little bit more transparent. That didn't work because Europe is also complicated and it's run by 27 member states. So this is something I think we need to think about by next year when we're running.
So the notion of, I think not many people are familiar, the EU can feel complicated.
Yes.
The European Commission is, it's got 27 for each of the member states, and then they elect a president from among those government-appointed leaders. Why are there why do some people want a president of Europe, the notion of an elected president of Europe who has a democratic mandate. What would that look like in the world?
Well, that would help, first of all, the European identity, which is something that we're struggling to build up, an EU identity. So that means we need some kind of more visible government structure to do that. And right now it really is there's this notion of speaking about a Europe of the citizens, where the citizens are really helping run then also the legislation in Europe. That's done not really that closely. We have instruments like the European Citizens Initiative, the world's only transnational tool of participatory democracy, but it doesn't go far enough, and it's really a Europe of 27 member states. Governments who also have veto power, who are really using this, much more than others. And in the situation then in France, I don't think it's so much a presidential issue or an election issue. It's true, Macron is really posing up to the far right, we can say, also to pass a legislation. But the issue there, I think the crisis in France is really the abstention crisis, because the more people didn't go to vote in France than people who are voting far right. So what Macron should be doing, instead of posing up to the far right, is posing up to those who are not voting and figuring out why are people so disenfranchised with politics and so lost so much trust in politics. And this is kind of the trend that we should be doing really everywhere. But I think this is the real crisis in France. It's not so much a one-person crisis.
So, as an American and a Michigander, but who's made your life and career in European democracy, do you now look at the American presidency differently? And how so?
Well, it was, one of the reasons that triggered my move to Europe 6 years ago, let's say. But
something happened, and in 2016,
something happened there. A little bit democratically traumatizing. No, but I mean, I really wouldn't say that we need to scrap our presidential system. What we need to do is actually make that more democratic, because, I mean, maybe also just to remind everyone, but Donald Trump didn't win the popular vote. He was not directly elected by the people. He won because of a system, right? So I would say scrap the electoral college system and have a more directly elected president. So I don't think we need to take the trauma that we experienced also in 2016 and say we need to scrap democracy altogether. People can't be trusted. That's not the case, because if we had a directly elected president, we wouldn't have had what we had.
With that, let's go to Tess. You look at across Asia, but I do want to start with your home country of the Philippines, which has had some presidents who are successful at getting a lot of attention around the world. And I wonder how, we know these personalities who've been president, and there's a new one now. What is the nature of the Philippine presidency? Is it a powerful institution, the kind of institution where a president, as the most recent one did, can essentially have a policy of responding to drugs with what appeared to be sort of authorization of murder of people involved in the drug trade or who were suspected of such? What is the nature of that system, and what does that tell us about might it tell us about elected presidents more broadly?
It is a very powerful position with so much power, in part because the law allows it, the Constitution mandates specific powers for the president, but also because the practice has been, and no thanks to Marcos Sr., so presidents in our country assume a lot of power. So to the extent that, think of Duterte, for example, he can launch a bloody drug war, citing all kinds of excuses, for example. So it's been like that, as far as I can recall. Very powerful. And also because even if we have a bicameral system consisting of the upper and lower houses, because of political dynasty, for example, among others, these are beholden to the president. So even if they're supposed to be, even if they're supposed to be independent of each other, but the way they function, for example, it's like, like I said, they're beholden to the president. If the president wants certain laws to be passed, certify them as urgent, that can easily happen. For example, we had the anti-terror law passed at the height of COVID, and one of its controversial provisions was on had an adverse impact on free speech and free press that sent a lot of, that caused a lot of fear among journalists. And Duterte, who's the predecessor of our incumbent president, wanted that kind of law. And no amount of petitions with the Supreme Court would have that revoked, or at least those controversial provisions. Well, some provisions, but not the really controversial ones stayed in place. So that's where we are now. And now we have the son of the
Ferdinand Marcos, yeah.
President Marcos Sr.
Yeah.
Everyone knows he was a dictator, and now he's in power. So, it came as a shock to the global community why the son of a former dictator is back in power, and he is. And it's a shame to us as a people, that 37 years after we ousted Marcos from power, the son is back. And it's as if the people power revolution of 1986 didn't happen at all. We're in a mess.
Is there any conversation about the presidency, about changing it, restructuring it, getting rid of it?
No, not so much. The conversation from where I stand or sit is around how do we make our democracy, as flawed as it is, really meaningful for the people. That's why there are a lot of civil society organizations, for example, making sure that, the very basic services that are provided by law are being accorded to the people. So the efforts are more around ensuring that, because we have good laws, are more around ensuring that the laws are enforced the way they should be. Because we have a good constitution, for example, but we have no enabling laws. And because, the political dynasty is deeply entrenched, as much as we want to get rid, for example, of political dynasty, no Congress has ever passed an enabling law. Yet it's been in the Constitution for decades.
I want to ask you about a different country and different president, the world's third largest democracy, Indonesia. Had a president, Joko Widodo, I hope I'm saying that right, who came in 2014 as a democratic reformer, and has become quite a powerful figure even in world affairs. He tries to straddle relationships with Putin and Xi Jinping with relationships with Europe and the West. But the stories and news out of it, I read at Asian Democracy Chronicles out of Indonesia, are not good. They talk about him extending his term when it's now supposed to end, about repression against journalists and others in society. How do you assess what happened there? Is that, a guy who comes in as Democrat reformer and is tending towards, what happened there? Again, is that personal or structural?
The interesting thing about Indonesia relative to the Philippines is we share a lot in common. They had the Reformasi, we had the People Power Revolution. They had Suharto, we had Marcos. So we share a lot in terms of, the political landscape. In terms of the reforms, major reforms. Indonesians, I'm no expert on Indonesian politics, but what I have been observing, what I've been reading, and because of the stories we're generating out of Indonesia, there was a lot of hope in Jokowi. But now it's turning out that he's turned out to be a huge disappointment. Among others, he's put, people in positions of power that more in his interest. I mean, having them there, the talks about potential extension, because he's not supposed to be able to run anymore.
Yeah.
But he's debunked that. But we don't know what exactly is going to happen. Indonesia being very big, so much bigger than the Philippines, is confronted with more complex issues, like they have identity politics, for example, and it's caused a lot of polarization among Indonesian people. So their problems are more complex than ours on the sheer basis of their size, and also because they were coming from given the
diversity
history.
of the place.
Yeah.
Okay, so I set the table here with examples for David Altman, political scientist, and let me expect to punch a little bit here, David. So one of the most successful and enduring conventional wisdoms in political science that reached popularity comes from a originally Spanish scholar named the late Juan Lins, who ended up at Yale, I believe, if I recall, who in the 80s wrote seminal works saying that presidential systems like the United States, and the United States being the exceptional presidential system, kill democracy faster than other kinds of systems.
Correct.
And had we talked about presidential systems where there's a powerful president who's both the head of the government and head of the state, and semi-presidential systems, and that is actually sort of bled into kind of common knowledge and defined. And did you ever meet Professor Lance?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Did you know him at all?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. He's kind of my intellectual grandfather because he's the advisor of my advisor.
So was he wrong?
Yes. Yes.
So what? What was he wrong?
I mean, let's start from the point that Juan Lins used Latin America as its object of study. And at that time, Latin American democracies, he was looking at our countries in the early 70s when most of our democracies break down. So he made this association between the regime, the executive regime, and the breakdown of democracy. And basically he said that given that that presidencies are based on dual legitimacies, two legitimacies, we vote twice, right? For the presidency and for the legislature. There is a fixed terms between both powers. They can solve correctly any tension or any cooperation problems. Therefore, these powers are not contingent of mutual confidence. Thus, in case of a crisis, the system is not prepared to deal with such a degree of tension. So, given that in Latin America we imported proportional representation from Europe and presidentialism from the States, this combination was a terrible combination for durability of democracy. Now, large studies...
So you're saying you took bad ideas from the United States and from Europe, or problematic?
Together, the combination of both multipartism with presidentialism is not a happy combination based on another professor, Scott Mainwaring, at the Kellogg Institute. Mm-hmm. Actually, he called about the unhappy combination of presidentialism with PR. So, given the fact that we all have that, and Juan Lins had only this universe of analysis, he said what you have said. Now, meta-analysis studies in comparative politics have shown that the evidence do not support that hypothesis. If you take all presidential regimes in the world and all the levels of democracy for long periods of time, there is no statistical significant association between presidentialism and the level of democracy. I tell you different. If there was such a difference between parliamentarism and presidentialism, let's assume that our leaders are at least smart enough to choose the better one. So maybe if parliamentarism is superior than presidentialism, we all have been parliamentarian regimes, and we are not.
There are advantages. So parliamentarianism is what? There's few Americans in the room.
Parliamentarian regimes is basically, it means a regime where you vote once, you vote for a legislature, and the legislature, based on coalition agreements, select a government, a coalition government. Usually it's a coalition, today in this world. Sometimes in Britain it's not, you have one-party government, but usually there are coalitions in Western Europe and other parts of the world. So there is not such a problem of dual legitimacies, but you have one vote, one legitimacy, which is the parliament. In case there is a huge crisis, the government collapses and you call for new elections or you make a new coalition. So it saves a lot of problems that presidentialism has, but presidentialism has a lot of advantages, such as identifiability and accountability of executive orders, which is something that in parliamentary regimes sometimes is blurred.
Right, because there are multiple parties in the
Because there are multiple parties,
Exactly.
And when
when I'm on Netflix and I watch that show Borgen,
Fantastic.
about the multi-party democracy of
Lovely.
Denmark, it's so wonderful. They talk to each other. You know, it's their relationships are not just, it's not like American politics, two parties screaming at each other.
America is the exception. If you look other presidential regimes, for instance, if you look in the Southern Cone, Chile, Uruguay, even Brazil, Ecuador, you see a completely different story about how presidentialism works. Even with all the differences that there are within presidential regimes, it's absolutely different. The American president, or the Chilean president, or the Uruguayan president. And I'm afraid that somehow this panel is motivated by some sort of cherry picking. For instance, because we were thinking on presidents like Trump, Duterte, Bolsonaro, Maduro in Venezuela. But I can mention as many bad presidents as I can mention as many bad prime ministers. Orban, Modi, Netanyahu, I don't know, I have many. But I can mention excellent presidents and excellent prime minister. Konrad Adenauer, Olof Palme, Jacinda Ardern.
Which countries? We don't know. Okay. Excellent ones.
Good presidents, well, it depends how you measure success.
Are they Democrats? Seen as pro-Democrat.
Well, in Uruguay we have very good presidents like Pepe Mujica. It's very famous all over the world.
Volkswagen.
Volkswagen with a three-dog leg, exactly, blah, blah, blah. President Lula, who was just re-elected in Brazil. Even President Lincoln in the United States, come on, that was a good president. Yeah, it was. And you have very good examples of very good presidents. The thing is that the United States of America, is a very particular country within the world of presidentialism.
So let's step back. Let's assume that the late great Professor Lins is wrong and his mentee are right. Let me ask to the panel. What do you see as the connection in this democratic breakdown? If it's not the particular kind of presidential system, and I should ask you, it's not having a presidential system versus a semi-presidential system. There's no statistical significance there either, where you divide it up. You might have a president and a prime minister.
Well, the hybrid regimes like France, for instance, because the president appoints a first minister, and the first minister is in charge of building a cabinet, and that cabinet is responsible to the legislature, but the president also has its legitimacy by his own behavior and office. Russia, I mean, there are so many mixed hybrid regimes in the middle, but we have two prototypes. You have parliamentarism, presidentialism, and Switzerland. Actually, there are three types, because the Swiss are absolutely different.
Well, that's a seven-headed executive. They change the presidency every year. They call it the magic solution. The two of these magic formula, right? There are four parties. Three of them have 2 seats in the executive, and a fourth has the. Yeah, I mean, they're maddeningly good at this democracy. They're
unique. They're unique. Actually, they choose presidents as in a parliamentary regime, but they behave as a presidential regime because they are not allowed to remove first ministers or presidents, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a hybrid. Also, the Swiss. I mean, Switzerland is. I see a lot of Swiss here.
Let's get the whole panel going. So where? I mean, it's not presidencies. Professor Altman is right. Let's say, okay. Yeah. Then. What are we talking about? When you're seeing in your experiences, is it a centralization of power? Is it the weakness of institutions, of liberal institutions? Is it the internet and all my buddies up in Silicon Valley at Facebook and Google and Twitter? How do you see? Is it?
It's okay to say all of the above.
What do you say? I mean. When you think about the problem of democracy, how much does that executive leadership come into it? That's where the attention goes, right? Media cover the big guy.
I think what you need to check bad presidents is good safeguard mechanisms. So recall election would be good to have. Term limits could be good also to have. Maybe also good institutions like the Supreme Court then that you could have. But those safeguards also need to be resilient against abuse, because we had, of course, here in Mexico, there was a recall election, but triggered by the president himself, but more to confirm than his own popularity and then continue with his agenda. Properly, this should be from the bottom up. The citizens should trigger a popular vote of no confidence. So I think you need to have not just these safeguards, but they need to be also resilient against abuse. And then also, when you're thinking about the process of voting, those need to also be as democratic as possible. Do people have accessibility also to the voting locations? How many people are pushed out of that process? Is the voting process itself actually democratic, or is it always the same kind of people going to vote and then electing certain leaders that are maybe going in a certain direction that's anti-democratic?
Asrar, I want to put the same question to you. I mean, you know, what is beyond the president there? What broke down? You mentioned corruption. Economics has been a great struggle for Tunisia. How do you think about the problem of the democratic line more closely, more broadly than just this president seizing power?
The well-documented problem of presidency and degree reflect the failure of presidency of particular leaders themselves. Still, it's not the only factor that intervenes within democratic problem. Weak institutions, corruption, inequality also play an important role in causing democratic problems.
I wanted to ask you, you had, against great odds, you have led campaigns for referendums to increase power in institutions. Was that experience in Tunisia in this context where there was a sense, you did that even in the recent years when there was a sense that you were starting to lose, that things were going the wrong way? What was that like in that context to kind of try to bring those sort of checks on power and to bring equality and human rights for women, for reproductive rights in particular in that context? What was it like?
It's like a problem for the people, the citizens of Tunis. And this president worked on this point.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, he sort of exploited
religion and equality to take all the power for him.
Yeah. And this is an old law professor, basically.
Yeah.
So,
The law professor.
Again, the academics. Tess, what are you thinking? You talked about civil society. It's strong, right? Yeah. So what is the larger context?
For the Philippines, it's a slew of major challenges. Centralization of power is just one of them. We have very weak institutions. The military was corrupted during Marcos. The Marcos Sr.'s regime. I look back, and from my readings, things really got bad during the second term of Marcos Sr. He was supposed to have left power in 1973, but then he had martial law, so he stayed on for another 14 years. And during that period, he corrupted institutions. That is the military. The military was very loyal to him. Although we had the People Power Revolution, that was thanks to some segments of the military. But even some financial institutions. We had to abolish the central bank. Well, now it goes by another name because it too was corrupted. And we've not been able to bounce back. So it's been how many years since we toppled him from power? 1986? It's been almost 4 decades. Well, there's a silver lining. Sorry.
There's a silver. Go ahead.
No, because when Cory Aquino came to power in 1986, she made sure that the succeeding constitution, we had the 1935 constitution when she came to power, then we had 1987. There were very good provisions, like making sure that the people where they have a say in policy making, for example, there would be community-based organizations, the civil society would be recognized, would have a role in governance, they would be represented. So the constitution is still there. But like I said, we've not really been able to overcome those challenges that started during the Marcos
Let me ask you a different Asian country, because it occurs in this conversation, Korea, South Korea, right? Which had a president who's corrupted, very strange scandal, and got rid of that president. I mean, with people power. I mean, people were out for months on the streets, sleeping, camping, playing music in the middle of a Korean winter, which is no joke, I can tell you from firsthand experience. A cold, bitter, So what is the lesson of that? I mean, that's a country that's had a lot of success in the last 35 to 40 years, democratization. What do you take from like that? Their civil society kicked out the president, basically.
The interesting thing about South Korea, again, relative to the Philippines, there was a time, decades back, when we were on the same economic level. You know, we were, long before we became the sick man of Asia. They had their own, you know, autocratic leader, as I can recall, not as Marcos. So, and to this day, how much of the stolen wealth by the Marcos family has not been returned? And that could have made a lot of difference in, you know, just how we are as a country. And that's just one factor.
You know, I ride my bike most days past a mansion that's an entire city block in Pasadena, California, that was owned by a Marcos mistress.
So time was when the Philippines was on equal footing with these Asian countries that are now, you know, well-developed, wealthy, relatively better governed. And where are we? We're so far behind.
Back to you, Daviana. So it's all of the above. And how somehow. So what would you do? You know,
I mean, this is not a voluntaristic question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not because I want or we want something, it's going to happen. I mean, institutions are somehow endogenous and epiphenomenal to larger things. So I would say that one of the commonalities between all the crises that you mentioned in your questions is a weakness in party system and somehow a wrong functioning in some institutions. How representation goes, how the Supreme Courts, for instance, control executives, how legislatures control executives, how executives control legislatures, etc. Because one of the good things, actually, about presidentialism is that you have a constant clash between powers, which it could be a pain, could be a headache, but at the same time, you are forcing politicians to control each other, and they have all the incentives to, you know, to behave more correctly.
I want to just raise one thing before we go to audience questions and just acknowledge an elephant in the room. Well, not actually in the room, but about 100 yards away. He's actually not that big a guy. He's tall, too short to ever be elected in the United States. You have Benito Juarez is the example, and we have that tall George Washington in our lizard brains. But you know, we're in a moment in Mexico where the Mexican president is being accused of violating democratic norms. His desk is just cat a corner out the door. That's the back of National Palace, and that probably is the corner where his desk is. I tried very hard actually to place myself as moderator here, but Mexican journalists, many of them, turned me down with more than a few saying they were afraid to take the topic. The context being that President Obrador, you know, Andres Manuel López Obrador targets journalists in press conferences and publicly, and this is a very dangerous country for journalists already. But it is interesting in that I want to acknowledge that context and recognize that we are not unaware of it, and I suspect it may come up given our audience here and where we are in questions. And thank you, Moira.
The first question is right here.
I'll ask a question. You know, I'm intrigued. I mean, first of all, as much as we think the United States is unique, I think those of us living in the United States felt, as strong as our institutions were, that we had a president that was assaulting those institutions, whether it was the Congress or the judiciary, and other institutions like the press. So talk a little bit about this issue of, you know, separation of powers. You know, the United States, most people see it as a place where you have very strong institutions, and yet we were on the precipice of our democracy being undermined.
Thank you. You stood in the
Who
question
wants to
aisle.
take that? Okay.
I mean, I guess I can just say, the Supreme Court should never be politicized. This institution should never be politicized. Maybe it's also a question about how to reform the Supreme Court, also bringing in that it's not a lifelong sentence as well. Maybe a different kind of approach to nominating Supreme Court justices too, because this, and also make it more clear about at what point in the presidency and during an election cycle a president can then nominate a Supreme Court justice, because we had this issue with Obama in the last year during an election year, right, where he didn't get in a Supreme Court justice. So I think these rules need to be made set clear, and they should not be open then for any kind of interpretation, which is a little bit what ended up happening in, that was 2015.
Actually, American democracy survived this blunt attack of a president. So institutions, instead of saying, okay, we have a terrible president, which I agree, the institutions, the whole architecture was enough strong to stop that and to help some of these people start to hold them accountable. So we can see, half empty, half, full glass, and it probably, counterfactually, if that attack would have happened in another place, let's say in some sub-Saharan Africa, probably we had been under a military regime already. But it didn't happen, and American democracy was resilient enough to face that. Barely, yeah, barely. That's fine. I agree.
Yes, I mean, the question of tonight is, are elected presidents?
Who are you? Let me state our name first.
Yes, I'm Bruno Kaufmann. I'm the one who forced Joe to be a co-president for 15 years. Thank you very much. Yes, the question here is, are elected presidents good or bad for democracy? And I wonder a little bit, I mean, elected means something. And I remember still very well when Estonia became independent, there was a royalist party, and I asked them, do you really want to have a monarch? And they said, yes, we want to have the Swedish prince. And I asked, why? They said, it's much better to have a stupid king than a powerful president. So my question is, do you think it would be better to have like stupid kings? Or also in many European countries we have non-elected, we have elected, indirectly elected presidents, which are not directly elected by the people. Wouldn't that be a better alternative?
Anyone want to take that? You have Tess?
Our problem, the systemic issues, are the structural issues. We can change, a shift to parliament, which we did at one point in our history. What happened? No, I'm looking at, the more complex issues we need to deal with, because we've had, under the same presidential system, good presidents. Relatively good. I mean, Cory Aquino, she's not perfect. But never tainted with, allegations of corruption. The son, Benigno. Yeah. We were dubbed the rising tiger of Asia during his term. So it's not so much to me, the presidential system, as, the larger socio-political context where our presidential system operates. That much I can say about our own context.
I'm sorely tempted as a sympathizer with California independence, to point out here that Harry and Meg are residents of Santa Barbara County, and their second child is born in the state of California, natural-born California, if we ever manage to go away. That would be the stupid queen or king model, and yeah.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about the excuse me, sorry. My name is Aaron Tiedemann. We've talked a lot about the institutions limiting presidents, but is the civil society, the political culture, the people's idea of what makes a successful president not also important to limiting what they could do bad or making sure they don't go too far? David, you almost got to, how do we define success, but how important is it how the people define success and how they respond to it even outside of institutions?
Well, I don't know. Look, I think that it's one of the dimensions of success could be popularity, and I think it's very popular to talk about presidential popularity, but if that was the case, Bukele would have been the best president on earth today because he's above 80%, and Bukele is a systematic violator of human rights in El Salvador, right? So I would be concerned about how we measure success in terms of popularity. Having said that, I'm answering coming from Aaron to Bruno. Yes, elected president could be fantastically good. I mean, there are zillion of cases, as well as zillion of bad cases. I mentioned few of them, at the same level as I can mention terrible prime ministers and very good prime ministers. So it's not a matter of regime. It's not a matter whether we have 1 or 2 votes. It's a matter of how the system works. We are talking about institutions. So bad elected presidents are not bad per se. Actually, they could be excellent.
But there's something about the title president in today's. We use this in institutions. My Little League has a president. You know, even a very democratic forum holds presidents. I mean, in China, if you deal with the Chinese government, Xi Jinping is
the general secretary.
He's the general secretary of the Communist Party. His real power is because he's the chairman of the Central Military Commission. But it is the policy of the foreign ministry and propagandists in China to always refer to him as president because it conveys legitimacy rather than the totalitarian he is.
But that's a nomenclatura. I mean,
but the nomenclature has real power.
I don't believe so.
You don't think so?
No, you can call it Secretary General or whatever. I don't know.
Vladimir Putin can say he was elected. Right?
Yeah, he was.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
But I don't buy also the cultural argument. I mean, if you let's take a terrible example, Germany, right? Germany in 1932 and 33 had one culture, and 1946 had the same culture, and they had absolutely different regimes. One, we knew what happened, and the other one we knew. So it's not about culture. In Latin America, we have more or less, we share the same culture, and you have working democracies, liberal democracies, and you have obscure regimes like the Venezuelan or the Cuban or the Nicaraguan. I don't know. And we are more or less the same.
The point about the civil society, I mean, there's a reason why autocrats go for civic space first and try to limit civic space, because civil society organizations are essentially organized citizens. So if you can control this, you can control also then the citizens in some way. So I think this is a super important question. We haven't really talked about it much, but there's a reason why autocrats go for civic space first. This is the first step that they go towards in illiberal democracies. We see this in Hungary, we see this in Poland, in Europe, and it's a really dangerous trend.
Also, I mean, on this question of civil society, you are civil society, and maybe even in reference to Egypt, which we talked a little bit about. But
Egypt is a military system, no rights and no freedoms. We can't talk.
But they had a chance, and they sort of, they lost.
But what I say, we should elect project, not persons, for democracy.
Like a participatory budgeting or a citizens' assembly. Elect the project, not the person. Simply said. Yes, you understand.
I want to just a quick point on success. In our own context, and I'd say maybe in other parts of Asia, success would be relative. For the poorest sector, success would be, the leaders they look up to, being able to ensure that they have food on the table, that they have work. But for the middle class, for example, it would be better governance that might sound alien to the poor sector. We don't care about that. Big words. We want food. We want work. Okay, basic services. So, and I think somehow this boils down to our, it seems we have lost our capacity for public discourse because we're so divided. Time was when when fake news, wasn't a major problem yet. There was public debate. I don't mean coming together and engaging in debate, but people being able to discuss issues, more intelligently, more meaningfully, more soberly, but we've lost that. So even our measure of success, the standards that should guide us in our choice of leaders, would vary. I mean, for the poor, it would be a populist leader like Duterte. Not for those of us, for example, others in other sectors. No way. And that's very sad. Civil society is, I've said this before, we have a very strong civil society culture, but they're being cracked down on, being red tagged. being associated with the communist insurgency, and some of them have died. So they're very strong, but because we have weak institutions, the justice system, they're being weakened.
Anything else? Other questions? We'll stop there. I will stop. Let's close. Let's close.
No, I was thinking just 30 seconds. It seems to me that you believe that parliamentarian regimes are more efficient than presidential regimes or more capable. But looking at
All those Scandinavians, man.
well, look at this. During the pandemic, you know, in the vaccination campaign, you can compare the success of vaccination campaign. The three countries that led the world in success were Chile, Uruguay, and Israel during a long period of time. 2 presidential regimes and 1 parliamentary regime. So there is no evident way to measure how one type of regime is superior than the other one. So we are thinking, and I agree with Tess, a comprehensive set of institutions and milieus and arenas that sometimes are so confusing, and when you control for each little piece, there is no statistical significance in the book.
Let's close there. It's an amazing night, a dream come true for those of us who work at Zocalo. A Zocalo on the Zocalo. I want to thank all of you for being here for this incredible conversation. It's been an honor. Thank you to your audience. You will be able to find a summary of our talk at ZocaloPublicSquare.org by tomorrow, plus interviews with our panelists. You can subscribe to Zocalo's newsletter, its podcast, and social media. David, Tess, Oscar, Daniela, many, many thanks. What a week and what a night. Thank you so much. Thank you.